Welcome to this cozy audiobook adventure, Miss Marple and the Murder Beneath the Rose Arbor, a Miss Marple story. I'm your narrator, and I invite you to settle in with a cup of tea as we journey to the quaint English village of St. Mary Mead in the 1950s. Join the sharp-witted Miss Jane Marple as she unravels a gentle puzzle of intrigue and human nature. This tale is perfect for a relaxing evening, full of clever clues and warm village charm. Let's begin. Chapter 1. The Shadow Under the Roses. In the tranquil village of St. Mary Mead, nestled in the rolling hills of the English countryside, the summer of 1952 unfolded with the lazy grace of a bumblebee drifting between blooms. Thatched cottages lined the winding lanes, their whitewashed walls glowing under the July sun, while hollyhocks and foxgloves nodded in tidy gardens. The heart of the village was its green, where children scampered, their laughter mingling with the distant clatter of a milk cart and the soft tolling of the church bell calling parishioners to evensong. It was a place where time seemed to pause, sipping tea with the villagers, and secrets, like seeds, lay buried just beneath the surface. Miss Jane Marple, an elderly spinster with a mind as sharp as her knitting needles, sat in her cozy sitting room at Mead Cottage. Her windows, flung open to catch the breeze, framed a view of her garden, where roses climbed a trellis with the confidence of old friends. She was working on a delicate pink shawl, her fingers moving with the precision of long practice, when the piece was shattered by the hurried crunch of gravel on her garden path. Dolly Bantry, her dearest friend from Gossington Hall, burst through the door, her hat slightly askew and her cheeks flushed with urgency. "Jane! Oh, Jane! You must come at once. It's simply dreadful. Murder at Rose Cottage." Miss Marple's needles paused mid-stitch, her pale blue eyes lifting with a flicker of curiosity. "Murder, Dolly? In St. Mary Mead? Do tell me more." Dolly collapsed into an armchair, fanning herself with a hand. "Hurry. The police are there now. Inspector Craddock's taken charge. But the village is in an uproar. Mrs. Price was to judge the flower show this weekend, you know, and her roses always took first prize." Miss Marple's lips curved into a faint smile. "A teacup and gloves. Everyday things, yet they speak volumes to those who listen. I shall come at once, Dolly. Let us see what secrets the roses are keeping." The two women set off down the lane, Miss Marple's black lace-up shoes tapping softly on the cobbles, her straw hat tilted against the sun. St. Mary Mead was alive with its usual bustle. Mr. Pye, the postman, pedaled by with a cheerful wave. Mrs. Clement, the vicar's wife, hurried past with a basket of hymnals, and a gaggle of children chased a hoop across the green, their giggles a stark contrast to the grim tidings. Yet as Miss Marple's keen eyes scanned the familiar faces, she sensed the undercurrent of whispers, the sidelong glances that followed them toward Rose Cottage. The cottage itself stood at the village's edge, a charming stone house with a steeply pitched roof and a garden that was the envy of St. Mary Mead. Its rose arbor, a tunnel of fragrant pink and crimson blooms, arched over a winding path leading to a small stone bench. It was here, beneath the cascading flowers, that Mrs. Lavinia Price's body had been found, now respectfully covered by a sheet as Inspector Craddock and his men worked nearby. Craddock, a young man with a serious demeanor and a respect for Miss Marple's insights, greeted them with a nod. "Miss Marple, Mrs. Bantry. A nasty business, this. Mrs. Price was last seen alive yesterday evening, around 6 o'clock, by her maid, Elsie. The doctor places the time of death shortly after dusk, strangled with a silk scarf from her own collection, tied tightly. No signs of a struggle, oddly enough, which suggests she knew her attacker. Miss Marple's gaze swept the scene, taking in the details with the precision of a botanist studying a rare specimen. The overturned teacup, its delicate china pattern glinting in the sunlight, lay beside a puddle of chamomile yesterday afternoon. Something about her will. He stands to inherit a tidy sum, but she was considering changes, favoring the village rose society instead. Miss Marple straightened, her expression thoughtful. Money is a common thread, Inspector, but not always the strongest. Tell me, was Mrs. Price well liked? Or did her roses perhaps cast a shadow on others' gardens? Dolly chimed in eagerly. Oh, she was a bit of a queen bee, Jane, always winning at the flower show, which ruffled feathers, especially Mr. Hobbs, that gruff gardener from Willow Farm. And the vicar, Reverend Hargreaves, had words with her over church funds. She could be generous, mind you, but sharp-tongued when crossed. Miss Marple nodded, her mind filing away these tidbits like yarn in a basket. A queen bee indeed. And bees, Dolly, guard their hive fiercely. We must look closely at those who buzzed around her. As they left the scene, the sun dipped behind a cloud, casting a fleeting shadow over the arbor. Miss Marple glanced back, her thoughts already turning over the clues. The teacup, the gloves, the footprint, the thread. In St. Mary Mead, where everyone knew everyone's business, or thought they did, secrets had a way of blooming in the quietest corners. And Miss Marple, with her unassuming air and needle-sharp mind, was determined to prune away the lies until the truth stood clear. Chapter 2. Faces in the Village. The morning sun bathed St. Mary Mead in a golden glow, painting the thatched roofs and cobblestone lanes with a warmth that belied the chill of yesterday's grim discovery. Miss Jane Marple, her straw hat perched neatly atop her silver hair, sat at the polished oak table in Dolly Bantry's airy dining room at Gossington Hall. The scent of fresh scones and strong tea mingled with the faint perfume of lavender wafting through the open window, a reminder of the gardens beyond. Dolly, ever the enthusiastic hostess, bustled about, setting out a plate of jam tarts while chattering about the village's latest scandal. Jane, I can scarcely believe it, Dolly said. Arthur's at Rose Cottage, I hear, sorting through papers. And Elsie, the maid, is there too. Then there's the vicar, of course, and that gruff Mr. Hobbs from Willow Farm. Oh, and Dr. Hayes, she was Mrs. Price's physician, you know. Miss Marple nodded, her mind already sorting the threads of this tangled affair. Let us begin with Rose Cottage. A house, like a person, holds its secrets close. The walk to Rose Cottage was a pleasant one, the lanes alive with the hum of village life. A blackbird trilled from a hawthorn hedge, and the postman, Mr. Pye, tipped his cap as he cycled past, his satchel bulging with letters. Children darted across the green, their laughter a bright counterpoint to the somber mood that lingered since Mrs. Price's death. Miss Marple's sharp eyes missed nothing. The way Mrs. Clement, the vicar's wife, paused to whisper to a neighbor, or how the butcher's boy lingered near Rose Cottage's gate, curiosity etched on his young face. Rose Cottage stood as charming as ever, its stone walls draped in ivy, though the rose arbor now bore an air of melancholy. Inside, the drawing room was a study in faded elegance, velvet curtains, a mahogany sideboard laden with silver, and a vase of wilting peonies that seemed to mourn their owner. Arthur Price, Mrs. Price's nephew, stood by the fireplace, his handsome face drawn with agitation. In his 30s, with a tailored suit and a tie slightly askew, he exuded the restless charm of a man more at home in London's clubs than St. Mary Mead's quiet lanes. Miss Marple, Mrs. Bantry, he greeted, his voice tight as he ran a hand through his dark hair. This is a terrible business. Aunt Lavinia was stubborn, yes, but I didn't harm her. She was set to cut me out of her will for that ridiculous Rose Society. Thought they'd use her fortune to plant more flowers of all things. I needed the money for my business, a motor car venture in the city, but murder? I'd never. Miss Marple settled into a chintz armchair, her knitting bag at her side. Of course, Mr. Price. Grief affects us all differently. You were here yesterday, I understand.
Trouble you further for now. As Arthur excused himself to answer a telephone call, Elsie, the maid, entered with a tray of tea things, her sturdy frame moving with practiced efficiency. In her 40s, with a plain face and hands roughened by work, she wore a starched apron that rustled softly. Her eyes, however, darted nervously to the window, where the rose arbor loomed like a silent sentinel. "Elsie," Miss Marple began, accepting a cup. "You must be dreadfully shaken. Mrs. Price was a kind employer, I hear." Elsie's lips tightened, her hands pausing over the sugar tongs. "She was good to me, miss. Gave me a home when I needed one. But she could be sharp, always fussing about her roses or the church funds. She argued with Reverend Hargreaves yesterday, said he wasn't accounting for donations properly. And Mr. Hobbs, the gardener from Willow Farm, he was furious. She claimed his special rose fertilizer recipe was hers, and he swore she'd stolen it to win the flower show. Miss Marple tilted her head, noting the faint tremor in Elsie's voice and the way her fingers brushed against a small seed packet tucked in her apron pocket. Unusual for a maid, perhaps a collector's habit. "And where were you last evening, Elsie, when Mrs. Price was last seen?" "In the kitchen, miss, tidying up after supper. I saw her go to the arbor around 6 with her tea. She liked to sit there at dusk." Elsie's eyes flicked again to the window, a shadow crossing her face. Miss Marple thanked her, her mind cataloging details. The petal on Arthur's sleeve, Elsie's seed packet, the tension in her glance. As they left Rose Cottage, Dolly chattered about the flower show. But Miss Marple's thoughts lingered on the arbor, where a teacup had spilled and gloves lay abandoned. Their next stop was the vicarage, a modest house beside the church, its garden bursting with marigolds and snapdragons. Reverend Hargreaves, a mild-mannered man with spectacles perpetually slipping down his nose, welcomed them with a tray of biscuits and a nervous smile. "Miss Marple, Mrs. Bantry, what a sad day for our parish." Myself. Less demanding. As they took their leave, Miss Marple's thoughts turned to the final suspect of the morning, Mr. Reginald Hobbs, the burly gardener from Willow Farm. They found him in his shed, a cluttered space filled with the sharp scent of fertilizer and the clink of tools. Hobbs, a man in his 50s with a weathered face and hands like spades, glowered over a pair of pruning shears. "Mrs. Price? A thief she was. Took my rose fertilizer recipe and passed it off as hers. Every year her blooms beat mine at the show. I was here last evening sharpening my tools, alone." Miss Marple noted his boots caked with earth that might match the arbor's footprint, and a curious detail, a night-blooming rose, rare for St. Mary Mead, tucked behind a sack of compost. "Your roses are remarkable, Mr. Hobbs," she said. "Did you ever share your secrets with Mrs. Price?" He snorted. "Share? She stole them. But I didn't touch her, if that's what you're thinking." As they returned to the lane, Miss Marple's mind buzzed like the bees in Hobbs's garden. Arthur's petal, Elsie's seeds, the vicar's earth-smudged cassock, Hobbs's rare rose, each a thread in a tapestry yet to be woven. St. Mary Mead, with its cozy cottages and whispered secrets,
held more beneath its surface than met the eye. And Miss Marple, knitting bag in hand, was determined to unravel it all. Chapter 3. A Village of Motives. The afternoon sun hung low over St. Mary Mead, casting long shadows across the village green where the scent of freshly cut grass mingled with the faint tang of chimney smoke from the cottages. Miss Jane Marple, her black lace-up shoes tapping softly on the cobblestone path, walked arm in arm with Dolly Bantry, whose enthusiasm for the unfolding mystery bubbled like a kettle on the boil. The village was a tapestry of familiar sights: the butcher's shop with its gleaming window, the post office where Mrs. Weatherby held court over gossip, and the church spire rising like a... The vicarage stood beside St. Mary's Church, a modest house with ivy curling up its stone walls, and a garden bursting with marigolds and snapdragons, their colors vivid against the gray stone. A blackbird's song floated from a nearby yew tree, and the faint creak of a gate added to the peaceful scene. Inside, Reverend Hargreaves welcomed them with a nervous smile, his spectacles slipping down his nose as he gestured to a tray of tea and shortbread biscuits arranged on a lace-covered table. A man in his late 50s, with thinning hair and a cassock that hung loosely on his slight frame, he exuded the air of a scholar more comfortable with books than people. "Miss Marple, Mrs. Bantry, what a sorrowful time for our parish," he said, pouring tea with hands that trembled slightly. "Mrs. Price was a generous soul, though we had a small disagreement yesterday about the church restoration fund. She thought I'd mismanaged donations. Utter nonsense, of course. A simple clerical error, which I explained." Miss Marple accepted a cup, her eyes noting a vase of roses on the vicar's desk, their petals a soft pink that matched those in Mrs. Price's arbor. The scent was faint but distinct, and a smudge of earth on the hem of his cassock caught her attention, perhaps from tending the vicarage garden. "A misunderstanding can weigh heavily, Reverend," she said mildly. "You saw Mrs. Price yesterday, I understand?" "Yes, in the afternoon, at the church," he replied, adjusting his spectacles. "She was quite upset, accusing me of carelessness. I assured her the funds were safe, but she left in a huff. I spent the evening in my study, preparing a sermon on charity. Rather fitting, don't you think? My wife, Mrs. Clement, brought me tea at 7, so I was here all night." Miss Marple's gaze lingered on the smudge, her mind recalling the footprint under the arbor. "And do you enjoy gardening, Reverend? Mrs. Price's roses were the pride of St. Mary Mead, I hear." He chuckled nervously, his fingers brushing the desk. "Oh, I dabble. Marigolds mostly. Roses are too sharp features softened by a professional smile. In her 50s, with neatly pinned gray hair and a crisp linen suit, she carried the authority of the village's only physician. "Miss Marple, Mrs. Bantry," she greeted, setting down a basket of groceries. "I suppose you're here about poor Lavinia. I confirmed the cause of death. Strangulation by that silk scarf sometime after 6. A tragic loss." Miss Marple's eyes, keen as a hawk's, noted a dropped prescription slip fluttering to the floor, its ink smudged but legible. "L. Price, cardiac consultation." "You were treating Mrs. Price for her heart, Doctor?" she asked. Dr. Hayes nodded, her expression composed. "Yes, she consulted me recently, complained of palpitations. I advised rest, but she was stubborn, always tending those roses. I was at a house call in Upper Mead last evening, miles away, until late." The slip, Miss Marple thought, was oddly dated. Weeks old, yet freshly written. A faint scent of antiseptic clung to Dr. Hayes's hands, but something else too. A whiff of lavender, perhaps from a recent patient. "You must see many secrets in your work, doctor," Miss Marple said lightly. "People confide in physicians, don't they?" Dr. Hayes's smile tightened. "Some do, but I keep their trust." Mrs. Price was private, though she mentioned her will once. Health concerns, you know. As they left the shop, Dolly whispered, "Did you see that slip, Jane? And the way she hesitated? I wager she knows more than she's letting on." Miss Marple's lips curved. "Patience, Dolly. Like knitting, the pattern emerges stitch by stitch." Their final stop was Willow Farm, where Mr. Reginald Hobbs, the rival gardener, worked in his cluttered shed. The air heavy with the earthy tang of compost and the metallic clink of tools. A burly man in his 50s, with a face weathered by sun and a scowl as permanent as the soil under his nails. Hobbs stood over a workbench, sharpening a vial on the workbench, labeled Rose Tonic, its cap loose and a faint residue of powder inside. A gardener's tool. Or something else. "You must take great pride in your work, Mr. Hobbs," she said. "Competition can stir strong feelings." He snorted. "Feelings? I didn't touch her, if that's what you mean. I've got my roses to tend." As they left, Miss Marple's mind hummed with details. The vicar's smudged cassock and notebook, Dr. Hayes's prescription slip and lavender scent, Hobbs's night-blooming rose and mysterious vial. The village, with its cozy routines and whispered rivalries, was a puzzle of motives, each suspect a piece waiting to be placed. St. Mary Mead might seem a haven of peace, but Miss Marple knew that even the quietest gardens held shadows. 3. Tangled threads. Ruppertilling. The late afternoon sun draped St. Mary Mead in a golden haze, softening the edges of the village green where preparations for the annual tea party were in full swing. Trestle tables, draped in white linen, groaned under plates of cucumber sandwiches, Victoria sponges, and glistening jam tarts, their sweetness mingling with the faint scent of honeysuckle from nearby hedges. Villagers bustled about, their voices a cheerful hum. Children darted between stalls, clutching homemade kites. Mrs. Weatherby, the shopkeeper, arranged her prize-winning scones with a proud flourish. And the church choir practiced a hymn, their notes floating like petals on the breeze. Yet beneath this idyllic scene, the murder of Mrs. Lavinia Price cast a subtle shadow, like a cloud passing over the sun. Miss Jane Marple, seated on a wicker chair beneath a willow tree, adjusted her straw hat and surveyed the gathering with eyes as sharp as her knitting needles. Her companion, Dolly Bantry, fanned herself with a program, her face alight with the thrill of village intrigue. "Jane, isn't it marvelous how life goes on, even after such a tragedy? But I heard the most shocking thing. Inspector Craddock found a letter in Mrs. Price's desk, written by Arthur. Arthur Price stood by the refreshment table, his tailored suit a stark contrast to the villagers' Sunday best. His charm was on full display as he handed a scone to a blushing girl. But his smile faltered when he caught sight of Inspector Craddock across the green. The inspector, clipboard in hand, was questioning a group of farmers, his expression serious. Dolly whispered, "That letter, Jane, it was quite threatening. Arthur wrote he'd do anything to secure his inheritance. Doesn't that sound suspicious?" Miss Marple tilted her head, her eyes noting a faint stain on Arthur's cuff. A smudge of ink, perhaps from the letter itself? Suspicious, yes, but not conclusive. Like my neighbor's cat who leaves paw prints everywhere but rarely catches the mouse. We must look beyond the obvious. As the choir launched into all things bright and beautiful, Miss Marple's attention shifted to Elsie, the maid, who was arranging teacups at a nearby table. Her sturdy frame moved with efficiency, but her hands trembled as she stacked saucers, and her apron pocket bulged with that curious seed packet Miss Marple had noticed yesterday. A villager, Mrs. Tuttle, leaned close to Elsie, whispering fiercely before glancing toward the vicarage. Miss Marple's ears caught a snippet. "Sneaking out at night, were you? To meet someone, I'll bet." Elsie flushed, her voice low but firm. "Nonsense, Mrs. Tuttle. I was fetching medicine for my mother, that's all. You'd do well to mind your own business." Miss Marple made a mental note. Elsie's nighttime errand could be innocent, or it could be a thread worth pulling. The seed packet, too. Perhaps a hobby, or a clue to a deeper connection with Mrs. Price's garden? "Dolly," she murmured, "gossip is like a weed. It spreads quickly but rarely tells the whole story." The crowd parted as Reverend Hargreaves approached, his cassock fluttering as he carried a tray of biscuits to the WI table. His spectacles glinted in the sunlight, and his nervous smile betrayed a man uneasy in the spotlight. He paused to chat with Mr. Hobb. Craddock's got his eye on Arthur, but I'd wager there's more to this than a greedy nephew. Miss Marple's gaze lingered on Dr. Hayes's bag, where a faint lavender scent lingered. Not from medicine, but perhaps from a sachet. "You knew Mrs. Price well, Doctor," she said. "Did she ever mention disputes beyond her nephew? With the church, perhaps, or her gardening rivals?" Dr. Hayes hesitated, her fingers tightening on her bag. She was private, but yes, she clashed with the vicar over funds. And Hobbs, well, he was livid about her roses. She once laughed that his fertilizer was no match for hers. But I was far from here last evening, tending a patient in Upper Mead. Miss Marple nodded, her mind catching on the lavender scent, so like the one she'd noticed at the shop yesterday. A coincidence? Or a clue? And the doctor's bag, could it hold more than bandages? "You must see many village secrets, Doctor," she said lightly. "A physician's trust is a heavy burden." Dr. Hayes's smile was tight. "I keep what I know to myself, Miss Marple." As the tea party wound down, Miss Marple excused herself to stroll toward the flower stall, where a display of roses drew a small crowd. Among the blooms, she spotted a curious detail. A brass button, half hidden in the grass, its surface etched with a tiny anchor design. She bent to retrieve it, her fingers careful not to disturb the surrounding earth. A man's coat button, perhaps. But whose? Arthur's tailored suits favored flashier designs, and the vicar's cassock had none. Hobbs, with his workman's jacket, was a possibility. Or was it another's entirely? She tucked the button into her pocket, her thoughts returning to the arbor at Rose Cottage. The overturned teacup, the mismatched gloves, the footprint, now joined by this button and the whispers of Elsie's nighttime wanderings. The tea party with its laughter and chatter had revealed more than scones and songs. It had shown the fault lines in St. Mary Mead's cozy facade, Arthur's ink-stained cuff, Elsie's seed packet and fur. Chapter 5. Hidden in the Soil. The morning mist clung to St. Mary Mead like a delicate shawl, softening the outlines of the thatched cottages and muffling the clink of milk bottles on doorsteps. The village stirred, gently awake.
The bakery's oven sent a warm waft of fresh bread across the lane. A dog barked lazily near the green, and the church bell tolled softly, marking the hour. Miss Jane Marple, her knitting bag tucked under her arm, stood in her garden at Mead cottage, inspecting her own modest roses. The dew sparkled on their petals, but her thoughts were elsewhere, turning over the threads of yesterday's tea party. Arthur's ink-stained cuff, Elsie's seed packet, the vicar's heated words with Mr. Hobbs, and Dr. Hayes' lavender-scented bag. Each was a stitch in a pattern not yet fully formed. Dolly Bantry arrived promptly at 9, her cheeks flushed with excitement as she waved a newspaper. "Jane, it's all over the village. Inspector Craddock's been poking about Rose Cottage again, and they're whispering that Arthur's letter is proof enough to arrest him. But I say there's more to it. What did you make of that button you found yesterday?" Miss Marple's eyes twinkled as she adjusted her straw hat. "A button, Dolly, is a small thing, but it can fasten a whole garment, or a mystery. Like my old friend Miss Hartnell's habit of misplacing her spectacles. It's the small oversights that reveal the most. Let us visit Rose Cottage again. The garden may have more to tell." The walk to Rose Cottage was a quiet one, the mist lending an air of secrecy to the familiar lanes. A blackbird darted across their path, its wings a fleeting shadow, and Mrs. Weatherby, sweeping her shop's doorstep, offered a knowing nod, as if the village itself held its breath. Rose Cottage stood serene, its stone walls aglow in the morning light. But the rose arbor, with its cascading pink blooms, seemed to guard its secrets more closely than ever. Inside, the air was heavy with the scent of wax polish and fading flowers. "Else confess, to help my sick mother's bills. But I'd never harm her. She caught me once, but forgave me." Miss Marple's gaze softened, though her mind sharpened. "A kind gesture, Elsie, but secrets weigh heavily. Did you notice anything odd in the garden that evening? Perhaps near the arbor?" Elsie hesitated, her fingers twisting the seed packet. A rare variety, Miss Marple noted, labeled Midnight Bloom. "I saw her with her tea around 6. There was a book on the bench, one of her gardening journals. I didn't think much of it then." Miss Marple nodded, filing away the journal's mention. "Thank you, Elsie. You've been most helpful." As Elsie returned to her work, Miss Marple led Dolly to the garden, where the rose arbor stood like a silent witness. The flagstones were still damp from the mist, and the overturned teacup, now cleared by the police, had left a faint stain of chamomile. Miss Marple knelt, her eyes scanning the earth near the bench. There, half buried in the soil, was a small glass vial, its label faded but legible. "Rose Tonic, Hobbs's Blend." The same vial she'd glimpsed in Mr. Hobbs's shed, though this one held a powdery residue, not liquid. "Dolly," Miss Marple murmured, slipping the vial into her pocket. "This tonic may nourish roses, or something far less benign. We must be cautious." Their next stop was the village shop, where Dr. Emily Hayes was purchasing a bottle of ink, her medical bag slung over her shoulder. Her sharp features softened as she greeted them, but her eyes held a guarded glint. "Miss Marple, Mrs. Bantry. Still sleuthing? I hear Craddock's fixated on Arthur, but I told him it's nonsense. Mrs. Price's death was personal, not just about money." Miss Marple's gaze lingered on the bag, catching that faint lavender scent again. "Personal, Doctor? Did Mrs. Price share any confidences with you? Perhaps about her health? Or her enemies?" Dr. Hayes's fingers tightened on her bag.
She mentioned her heart, yes, but also, well, she suspected tools and that night-blooming rose, its pale petals glowing in the dim light. Hobbs straightened as they approached, his scowl deepening. Back again? I told you. I was here all evening, working. That woman stole my recipe, but I didn't touch her. Miss Marple's eyes flicked to his boots, still caked with earth, and the workbench, where a similar vial to the one in her pocket sat, its cap tightly sealed. Your roses are splendid, Mr. Hobbs, she said. This tonic of yours, it's quite unique, I imagine. He grunted, his hand brushing the vial. Secret blend, keeps the bloom strong. She wanted it, but I never shared. Miss Marple noted a faint scratch on his hand, fresh and thorn-like, as if from a recent struggle with roses, or something else. Competition can be fierce, she said mildly. Did Mrs. Price ever visit your shed, perhaps to discuss your methods? Never, he snapped, but his eyes flicked to the night-blooming rose, betraying a flicker of unease. As they returned to the lane, Miss Marple's mind buzzed with new threads. Elsie's confession and journal mention. Dr. Hayes's debts and lavender scent. Hobbs's vial and scratched hand. The vial in her pocket felt heavy, its powdery residue a question mark. At Rose Cottage, she slipped into the potting shed, a cramped space filled with tools and seed trays. There, on a dusty shelf, was Mrs. Price's gardening journal, its pages filled with meticulous notes. A coded entry caught her eye. D.H. knows too much. Must protect B's secret. D.H. Dr. Hayes? And B, could it be a person or something else? Dolly, Miss Marple said, closing the journal. This village is like my garden. The surface is lovely, but the roots run deep. We're closer to the truth, but we must tread carefully. The mist had lifted, revealing St. Mary Mead in all its quiet beauty. But Miss Marple knew that beneath the soil secrets waited to be unearthed. With her knitting bag in hand, she walked on, ready to unravel the next knot in this tangled mystery. Chapter 6. Jane. The village is positively buzzing. Inspector Craddock arrested Mr. Hobbs this afternoon. Found a silk-like rope in his shed, they say, just like the scarf that strangled poor Mrs. Price. Do you think he's our man? Miss Marple's eyes twinkled behind her spectacles, her lips pursed in thought. Arrests, Dolly, are like pruning a rose too soon. Sometimes you cut away the wrong branch. Mr. Hobbs may have the means, but we must consider the heart of the matter. Let us return to Rose Cottage. The arbor may yet whisper something new. The village was settling into its evening rhythm as they passed the green, where a few children lingered, kicking a ball in the fading light. The post office was shuttered, but a faint glow from Mrs. Weatherby's window suggested she was still trading gossip over a late tea. The church loomed silent, its spire a dark silhouette against the sky, and Miss Marple noted a faint flicker of candlelight in the vicarage, where Reverend Hargreaves was likely poring over his sermons. Or perhaps something less pious. Rose Cottage stood at the village's edge, its stone walls softened by the twilight, the rose arbor a cascade of shadows and blooms. The police had cordoned off the garden, but a young constable, recognizing Miss Marple's quiet authority, nodded them through. The arbor was eerily still, the scent of roses mingling with damp earth. Miss Marple paused by the stone bench where Mrs. Price had been found, her eyes scanning the flagstones. The overturned teacup was gone, but the chamomile stain remained, a ghostly reminder of that fatal evening. Dolly, Miss Marple said softly, kneeling to examine the ground, do you recall the gardening gloves we saw here? One large, one small, as if borrowed from another's hand. I've been thinking, They suggest a left-handed killer. Yet Mr. Hobbs is right-handed, is he not? Dolly gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. Jane, you're right. I saw him pruning yesterday, all with his right hand. But that rope, Craddock says it's damning evidence. Miss Marple's fingers brushed the soil, uncovering a tiny shard of glass, glint though her mind raced. Thank you, Tommy. A shadow can tell us much even in twilight. Did you recognize it? He shook his head, his eyes wide. No, miss, it was too dark, but it moved quick, toward the vicarage path. The vicarage path, a narrow trail winding past the church to the village center. Miss Marple filed this away, her thoughts turning to Reverend Hargreaves's smudged cassock and nervous demeanor. We mustn't keep you, Tommy. You've been very helpful. As they left the garden, Dolly whispered, A shadow, Jane. And that glass shot. Do you think someone's framing Hobbs? But who? Miss Marple's lips curved. Patience, Dolly. Like my knitting, the pattern emerges with time. Their next stop was the village hall, where a small crowd had gathered for an impromptu meeting about the flower show, now overshadowed by Mrs. Price's death. The air was thick with the scent of polished wood and brewing tea, and villagers murmured in clusters, their voices a low hum of speculation. Reverend Hargreaves stood at the podium, his spectacles glinting as he called for calm. We must honor Mrs. Price's legacy by continuing the show, he said, though his voice wavered. She would have wanted it. Miss Marple noted his hands, clutching a handkerchief embroidered with a tiny rose, a gift from Mrs. Price, perhaps? Across the room, Dr. Emily Hayes leaned against a wall, her medical bag at her feet. Her sharp eyes met Miss Marple's, and she nodded curtly before turning to speak with Mrs. Clement, the vicar's wife. Elsie, meanwhile, hovered near the tea urn, her apron pocket still bulging with that seed packet labeled Midnight Bloom. As the meeting broke into smaller conversations, Miss Marple approached Dr. Hayes, her tone mild. Doctor, you mentioned Mrs. Price's suspicions about her garden. Did she ever speak of specific threats, perhaps something beyond Mr. Hobbs's rivalry? Dr. Hayes's fingers tightened on her bag, the lavender scent faint but unmistakable. She was paranoid, Miss Marple. Said someone was poisoning her roses, weed killer, she thought. I told her it was nonsense, but she insisted. Entry. D.H. knows too much. Must protect B's secret. Loomed large. Was D.H. Dr. Hayes, and B a person, or perhaps a place, like the benevolence note in the vicar's study? As the meeting ended, Miss Marple and Dolly stepped outside, where the twilight had deepened, the stars just beginning to prick the sky. A sudden commotion drew their attention. Arthur Price, his face flushed, was arguing with a villager near the hall's gate. I wasn't even here that evening, he snapped. I was at the Red Lion, asked the barman. Miss Marple's gaze settled on his coat, where a second button was missing, its thread frayed in a pattern matching the brass button she'd found. Dolly, she murmured, Arthur's alibi may be as loose as his stitching. And that shadow Tommy saw, toward the vicarage path. Dolly's eyes widened. The vicar? But he was writing sermons, wasn't he? Oh, Jane, this is getting terribly tangled. Miss Marple nodded, her mind weaving the clues. The left-handed gloves, the glass shard, the journal's code, Arthur's missing button, Dr. Hayes's lavender, Elsie's midnight bloom, and the vicar's rose-embroidered handkerchief. A false lead had tightened around Mr. Hobbs, but the true killer, she sensed, was still hidden in the vines of St. Mary Mead's secrets. As the village settled into night, Miss Marple walked home, her knitting bag swinging gently,
ready to unravel the next twist in this intricate mystery. Chapter 7. Petals of Truth. The dawn broke over St. Mary Mead with a soft, rosy light, painting the thatched cottages and winding lanes in hues of hope and quiet promise. The air was crisp, carrying the earthy scent of dew-kissed grass and the faint sweetness of honeysuckle from hedgerows. A milk cart rattled along the cobbles, its bottles clinking like a gentle morning chorus, while a lark's song rose above the distant chime of the church bell. Miss Jane Marple stood in her garden at Mead Cottage, her knitting bag slung over her arm, her sharp eyes tracing the delicate vein. Clear our thoughts. The village was stirring, its rhythms as familiar as a well-worn shawl. Children scampered across the green, their laughter mingling with the creak of a cart as Mr. Pye, the postman, pedaled by with a cheerful wave. Yet, beneath this cozy facade, the murder of Mrs. Lavinia Price lingered like a shadow, and Miss Marple's keen eyes missed nothing. The way Mrs. Clement, the vicar's wife, hurried past with a nervous glance, or the faint flicker of a curtain at the vicarage window. Their walk led them back to Rose Cottage, where the rose arbor stood in serene silence, its pink blooms heavy with dew. The police tape had been removed, but the garden felt hushed, as if holding its breath. Miss Marple paused by the stone bench, her gaze settling on the chamomile-stained flagstone where the teacup had fallen. "Notice, Dolly," she said softly, "how roses thrive on care, yet wilt with neglect. So it is with motives. Some are nurtured, others hidden in plain sight." Dolly frowned, peering at the ground. "You mean like that journal Elsie mentioned? Do you think it holds the key?" Miss Marple nodded, her fingers brushing the knitting bag where she'd tucked Mrs. Price's gardening journal, found yesterday in the potting shed. "Let us return to the shed. There may be more to unearth." The potting shed was a cramped, earthy space, filled with the scent of compost and the rustle of seed packets. Dusty shelves held trowels, twine, and jars of fertilizer. But Miss Marple's eyes went straight to a corner where a stack of old journals lay, their pages yellowed but meticulously kept. She opened the one she'd found, its coded entry: "D.H. knows too much. Must protect B's secret," still vivid in her mind. Flipping through, she found another note, scrawled in Mrs. Price's neat hand. "Pollen on scarf, night blooming. H's betrayal." H. Hobbs? And the scarf, could it point to the rare night-blooming rose in his shed? "Dolly," Miss Marple murmured, "this pollen is no accident." Head, his hands clutching that rose-embroidered handkerchief. "No, I was in my study, as I said. But I saw her in the garden, arguing with someone, too far to see who. I swear I stayed away." Miss Marple noted the handkerchief's rose, so like Mrs. Price's blooms, and a faint smudge of pollen on his sleeve, pale as the night-blooming variety. "Thank you, Reverend. Truth, like a petal, falls gently when shaken." As he left, Dolly whispered, "Bernard, that's the B in the journal, isn't it? But the vicar's so meek. Could he really?" Miss Marple's lips pursed. "Meekness, Dolly, can mask many things. Let us seek Dr. Hayes next." They found Dr. Emily Hayes at her surgery, a tidy room smelling of antiseptic and lavender, her medical bag open on the desk. Her sharp features were composed, but her eyes betrayed a flicker of unease as Miss Marple and Dolly entered. "Still investigating, Miss Marple?" she said, her voice cool. "I hear Hobbs is in custody, sensible given his temper." Miss Marple settled into a chair, her knitting needles clicking softly. Tempers flare, doctor, but evidence can mislead. Mrs. Price suspected her roses were tampered with. Weed killer, you said. Did you ever examine her garden, perhaps for traces of poison? Dr. Hayes's fingers paused over a prescription pad. Poison? No, I told her it was nonsense. But she was convinced someone was sabotaging her. She even accused me of knowing too much about her health, her will. I admitted my gambling debts to you, but there's more. She knew my brother, too, a chemist, disgraced for selling fake tonics. She threatened to tell the village if I didn't alter her medication. Miss Marple's eyebrows rose. Another brother's secret. Curious. And that evening, you were at your house call. Until 8, Dr. Hayes said firmly, though her hand brushed the lavender-scented bag. Ask the family. Miss Marple noted a smudge of ink on her fingers, similar to Arthur's cuff. Clarity. The pollen on the scarf. The vicar's brotherly secret. Dr. Hayes's disgraced chemist sibling. Arthur's frayed coat. The journal's code, DH, and B's secret, pointed to Dr. Hayes and a family scandal, but the left-handed gloves and pollen suggested a deeper truth. St. Mary Mead, with its cozy cottages and hidden roots, was yielding its secrets, petal by petal, and Miss Marple felt the pattern taking shape. "Dolly," she said, her eyes bright, "we're close now. Like a rose, the truth blooms when the time is right." Chapter 8. Thorns of Truth. The midday sun bathed St. Mary Mead in a warm golden light, gilding the thatched cottages and casting dappled shadows across the village hall's weathered stone walls. The air was alive with the hum of bees in the lavender beds and the faint jingle of a bicycle bell as Mr. Pye, the postman, pedaled past. Inside the hall, the atmosphere was anything but serene. Villagers had gathered for an impromptu meeting called by Inspector Craddock to address the mounting tension surrounding Mrs. Lavinia Price's murder. The scent of polished wood and brewing tea mingled with the murmur of anxious voices, a stark contrast to the usual chatter of flower shows and church fetes. Miss Jane Marple sat in a corner, her knitting needles clicking softly as she observed the crowd with eyes as sharp as thorns. Her mind wove together the threads of recent discoveries. The left-handed gloves, the glass shard with powdery residue, Arthur's missing button, Elsie's midnight bloom seed packet, Dr. Hayes's lavender scent, the vicar's rose-embroidered handkerchief, and the journal's cryptic notes about DH and B's secret. The pollen on the scarf, linked to Mr. Hobbs's night-blooming rose, had tightened the noose around him. Yet Miss Marple sensed the truth lay elsewhere, hidden among the village's cozy facades. Dolly Bantry, seated beside her, clutched a handkerchief, her eyes darting across the room. "Jane, it's like a storm brewing in here." With tension, as eyes turned to the suspects. Arthur Price stood near the tea urn, his tailored suit rumpled, his face flushed with defiance. "I've said it before, Inspector. I was at the Red Lion that evening, not the Arbor. The barman can confirm it. That letter you found was a plea, not a threat." Craddock's eyes narrowed. "Your alibi's shaky, Mr. Price. The barman says you left by 7, and Rose Cottage is a short walk. And that button found at the scene matches your coat, doesn't it?" Arthur's hand flew to his cuff, where the frayed thread of a missing button stood out. I lost that ages ago. Anyone could have picked it up." Miss Marple noted his agitation, her gaze catching a faint smudge of ink on his fingers. echoing the letter's tone. "Small things, Mr. Price," she said softly, "can stitch a story or unravel it." Next, Elsie stepped forward, her sturdy frame trembling as she clutched her apron. The seed packet, labeled Midnight Bloom, bulged in her pocket, and her eyes darted to Dr. Hayes across the room. "I've told you, Inspector. I was in the kitchen that evening, cleaning. I took some silverware, yes, for my mother's medicine, but I'd never hurt Mrs. Price. She was kind to me, even when she caught me." Craddock frowned, flipping through his notes. "You mentioned a journal, Elsie. Did you see anyone else near the arbor that night?" Elsie's fingers twisted the packet, her voice barely a whisper. "I saw a shadow, like Tommy said, moving toward the vicarage path. I thought it was... well, I couldn't see clear." Miss Marple's needles paused, her mind latching onto the vicarage path, where Reverend Hargreaves had claimed to be in his study. Her eyes drifted to the vicar, who stood near the podium, his spectacles glinting as he clutched his rose-embroidered handkerchief. His face was pale, his hands trembling as he addressed Craddock. "I've said all I know, Inspector. I was writing my sermon, as my wife can call." Craddock raised an eyebrow. "Your alibi holds, Doctor, but you admitted Mrs. Price knew your gambling debts, and we found a prescription slip dated oddly in her name. Care to explain?" Dr. Hayes's fingers tightened on her bag. "A clerical error. She consulted me about her heart, nothing more." Miss Marple's mind flashed to the journal's code. D.H. knows too much, must protect B's secret. She leaned forward, her voice soft. "Doctor, you mentioned Mrs. Price's suspicions of tampering. Did you ever test her roses, perhaps for weed killer?" Dr. Hayes hesitated, her eyes darting to Elsie. "No, I dismissed it as paranoia. But she was adamant someone was poisoning her garden." The room fell silent, the weight of accusations hanging heavy. Miss Marple's thoughts raced. The left-handed gloves ruled out Hobbs, but the pollen and journal pointed to a deeper truth. As the meeting dissolved into murmurs, she slipped outside, drawn back to Rose Cottage's arbor. The garden was quiet now, the roses glowing in the midday sun. Kneeling by the bench, she noticed a glint in the soil, a small key, etched with the initials R.C. Rose Cottage's arbor gate key, missing since the murder. "Dolly," Miss Marple said, pocketing the key, "this unlocks more than a gate. Only someone with access could have moved so freely that night." Dolly gasped. "An insider, Jane? But who? Elsie? The vicar?" Miss Marple's eyes twinkled. "Or someone whose secrets are deeper than we thought." Back at the hall, she approached Dr. Hayes, who was gathering her bag. "Doctor," Miss Marple said, "your lavender scent is distinctive. Was it in Mrs. Price's garden that evening, perhaps?" Dr. Hayes paled, her voice sharp. "I told you I was at Upper Mead." Miss Marple nodded, but her mind locked onto the key, found in the soil near Dr. Hayes's usual path. The journals D.H., Dr. Hayes, and B's secret, her brother, the disgraced chemist. The pollen, the gloves, the key, all pointed to someone close, someone trusted. As the villagers dispersed, Miss Marple watched Dr. Hayes's retreating breath, its thatched cottages and winding lanes, bathed in the golden glow of a fading summer day. Miss Jane Marple sat in a high-backed armchair, her knitting bag at her side, her pale blue eyes bright with the quiet certainty of a puzzle nearing completion. The threads of the mystery, the left-handed gloves, the glass shard, Arthur's missing button, Elsie's seed packet, Dr. Hayes's lavender scent, the vicar's rose-embroidered handkerchief, the arbor gate key,
and the journal's cryptic "DH knows too much, must protect B's secret" had woven a pattern only she could see. Dolly Bantry, her face alight with anticipation, bustled about, ensuring their guests were comfortable. "Jane, I can hardly sit still. You've gathered them all. Arthur, Elsie, the vicar, Dr. Hayes. Even Mr. Hobbs is here, released from custody this morning. Are you certain you know who did it?" Miss Marple's lips curved into a gentle smile, her knitting needles resting in her lap. "Certainty, Dolly, comes from observing the small things, like the way a rose's petals fall. They point to the truth if one looks closely." Let us begin. The drawing room was crowded with the suspects, their faces a mix of nerves and defiance. Inspector Craddock stood by the fireplace, his clipboard tucked under his arm, his expression one of wary respect for Miss Marple's unassuming brilliance. Arthur Price slouched in a corner, his tailored suit rumpled, his fingers fidgeting with a cufflink. Elsie, the maid, perched on a stool, her apron pocket empty of its usual seed packet, her eyes darting to the door. Reverend Hargreaves clutched his rose-embroidered handkerchief, his spectacles slipping down his nose. Dr. Emily Hayes sat stiffly, her medical bag at her feet, the faint lavender scent clinging to her. Mr. Reginald Hobbs, his burly frame barely contained by a chair, scowled, his hand still bearing the faint scratches of thorns. Miss Marple rose, her voice soft but commanding attention. "Thank you all for coming. Stole silver, yes, but I'd never hurt her. I saw that shadow, I swear." Miss Marple's gaze softened. "Your honesty, Elsie, clears you. The midnight bloom seed packet was a gardener's passion, not a killer's motive. The shadow you and Tommy saw led us astray toward the vicarage path." Reverend Hargreaves paled, his handkerchief twisting in his hands. "I was in my study, Miss Marple. My brother's scandal, Bernard's theft, was a shame I bore, but I didn't harm her." Miss Marple tilted her head, her eyes on the handkerchief's rose motif. "Your secret weighed heavily, Reverend, and the pollen on your sleeve, night blooming, like Mr. Hobbs's roses, suggested a connection. But you were in your study, as your wife confirmed. Your guilt was in silence, not murder." Hobbs grunted, his scowl deepening. "I told you that rope wasn't mine. Someone planted it, like they planted that shard in the arbor." Miss Marple's smile was faint. "Quite right, Mr. Hobbs. The rope and shard were meant to frame you, as were the night-blooming rose pollen on the scarf. Your right-handed grip ruled you out. The gloves were for a left-handed killer." All eyes turned to Dr. Emily Hayes, whose face remained composed, though her fingers tightened on her bag. Miss Marple stepped closer, her voice steady. "Dr. Hayes, you were Mrs. Price's confidant, trusted with her health and secrets. The journal spoke of D.H., you, and B's secret. Not the vicar's brother Bernard, but your own brother, Benjamin, a disgraced chemist who sold fake tonics. Mrs. Price knew, didn't she? She threatened to expose him, and you, to protect her legacy." Dr. Hayes's eyes flashed, but her voice was calm. "Preposterous. I was at a house call miles away." Miss Marple held up the arbor gate key, its RC initials glinting. "This key, found near your usual path, granted access to..." Hand on her arm. "Dr. Emily Hayes, You're under arrest for the murder of Mrs. Lavinia Price." The room fell silent, the weight of truth settling like dust. Elsie sobbed softly, Arthur exhaled, and Hobbs muttered in relief. Reverend Hargreaves clutched his handkerchief, his face a mask of sorrow. Dolly, wide-eyed, whispered, "Jane, you've done it again." Miss Marple returned to her chair, her knitting needles resuming their quiet rhythm. "Human nature, my dears, is like a garden. It blooms with care, but thorns grow when secrets are buried too deep." As Craddock led Dr. Hayes away, the drawing room seemed to exhale, the tension dissipating like mist in the sun. St. Mary Mead, with its cozy cottages and whispered secrets, would heal. But Miss Marple knew the truth had its own beauty, sharp and clear as a rose's bloom. Chapter 10. Tea and Reflections. The morning sun poured through the open windows of Miss Jane Marple's sitting room at Danemead Cottage, bathing the cozy space in a soft golden light. The air was fragrant with the scent of freshly brewed Earl Grey and warm scones, their buttery aroma mingling with the faint perfume of lavender from a vase on the windowsill. Outside, St. Mary Mead stirred gently into life. The distant clatter of a milk cart echoed along the cobblestone lane, a blackbird trilled in the hawthorn hedge, and the church bell chimed a gentle reminder of the hour. The village, with its thatched cottages and tidy gardens, seemed to sigh in relief, as if the shadow of Mrs. Lavinia Price's murder had finally lifted. Miss Marple sat in her favorite chintz armchair, her knitting bag at her side, a delicate pink shawl draped across her lap. Her pale blue eyes, sharp as ever, twinkled with quiet satisfaction as she poured tea for her guests. Dolly Bantry, whose face glowed with curiosity, and Inspector Craddock, who sat with his notebook closed, a rare smile softening his serious demeanor. The silver tea tray gleamed on the low table, laden with scones, clotted cream, and a thread. These were everyday things, yet they spoke volumes. The teacup, stained with chamomile, Mrs. Price's favorite, held traces of a sedative, not enough to kill, but enough to dull her senses. The gloves, one large, one small, were worn by a left-handed person, a detail that ruled out Mr. Hobbs, who is right-handed. Dolly gasped, her scone forgotten. "The gloves, I thought they pointed to him, with that rope in his shed." Miss Marple nodded. "A clever misdirection, Dolly. The silk-like rope and a glass shard with powdery residue were planted to frame Mr. Hobbs. The shard matched a vial in his shed, labeled rose tonic. But the residue was not fertilizer. It was a chemical, likely from a chemist's hand. This led me to the journal, found in the potting shed." She gestured to the gardening journal, now on the table, its pages open to the coded entry. "DH knows too much, must protect B's secret." Mrs. Price's notes were meticulous. Miss Marple continued. She wrote of pollen on scarf, night blooming, H's betrayal, pointing to Mr. Hobbs' rare rose, but also of DH and B. At first I thought B was the vicar's brother Bernard, whose theft Mrs. Price knew. But the true B was Benjamin, Dr. Hayes's brother, a disgraced chemist who sold fake tonics. Craddock's eyebrows rose. "Benjamin Hayes? We had no record of him." Miss Marple's eyes twinkled. "Mrs. Price did. She discovered Benjamin's scandal through old letters and threatened to expose both him and Dr. Hayes, whose reputation as the village physician hung in the balance." Dr. Hayes, trusted by Mrs. Price, had access to her home and garden. The arbor gate key found in the soil near her usual path bore the initials RC, Rose Cottage. Only someone close could have used it. Dolly's eyes widened. The key! That's what sealed it, wasn't it? Indeed. Anchor design was indeed Arthur's, lost earlier and placed to mislead. His inky cuff and shaky alibi, leaving the Red Lion early, made him seem guilty. But he was merely desperate for money, not murderous. Elsie's theft of silverware was a petty crime, born of love for her sick mother. And her midnight bloom seed packet was a gardener's quirk, not a motive. Craddock leaned back, impressed. And the vicar? His brother's scandal seemed promising. Miss Marple's expression softened. Reverend Hargreaves carried guilt for Bernard's theft, and his rose-embroidered handkerchief and pollen-smudged sleeve suggested a link. But his alibi held. He was in his study, as Mrs. Clement confirmed. His silence was his only crime. Dolly sighed, spreading jam on a scone. So it was all about Dr. Hayes protecting her brother. How dreadful. To kill for shame. Miss Marple sipped her tea, her gaze drifting to the garden. Shame, Dolly, is a powerful root. Dr. Hayes feared ruin for herself and Benjamin. She wove a careful plan, but like a poorly knitted shawl, it unraveled with a single pull. The key, the pollen, the gloves, the journal. Each was a thread that led to her. Craddock closed his notebook, a rare grin breaking through. Miss Marple, you've outdone us again. The evidence is solid. Dr. Hayes confessed last night, confirming your theory. She's in custody, and the village can rest. The room fell quiet, the only sounds the clink of teacups and the distant trill of the blackbird. Miss Marple's needles resumed their rhythm, her thoughts drifting to the village beyond. St. Mary Mead, with its cozy cottages and whispered secrets, had weathered the storm. The rose arbor, once a place of tragedy, would bloom again, its petals untouched by the darkness that had briefly taken root. Dolly, she said, her voice soft, life is like a garden. It thrives on care, but even the deepest shadows cannot stop the seasons. Mrs. Price's roses will grace the flower show, and the village will